I think our approach, at least in terms of my relationship with David Fincher, is very specific. It's specific to the project and related to what we're doing. It's entirely driven by the story. We have a similar method in terms of how we break scenes down and how we talk about the process of photographing them and what we will do. But what we actually do is always driven by what's in the script and how the actors are performing the scene and what the location is. I was terrified when we set out to make Mank. I was very worried, yeah. I was honored to be given the opportunity, and I felt an enormous responsibility to do it with respect to the film that we were telling the story about. I just wanted to do the best possible quality of work that was appropriate for the film. And so constantly looking at the work and thinking about what could be improved and what could be better. When you're a gaffer, you spend a lot of time with cinematographers, watching cinematographers solve the challenges that they are confronted with. I was fortunate to work with some of the best, and I was able to watch them solve similar problems in different ways and then see the results. And so that was enormously helpful for me because I absorbed all of this technique from all of these guys I was working with, and I would watch them not just solve lighting problems or photography problems, but communication with the directors, communication with the actors, watching them develop the ideas. You know, when you're a gaffer, you spend a lot of time in the prep with the cinematographer and oftentimes with the director and the production designer. You scout locations, you see the ideas take shape in a way that you don't get maybe if you work as an operator, for example. For me, that was really my film school. Dana is a very good friend of mine, and he called me and he asked me to shoot that episode for him. I said, "But Dana, don't you just want to shoot it yourself?" And he said, "No, come, bring me your ideas." You know, Dana is someone who is incredibly generous with his creativity and is looking for collaboration and ideas. I think when you are working with someone who has similar experiences to you, you have like a shared brotherhood of what you know is going to be difficult and what might be interesting, and especially as a cinematographer, we speak in some ways the same language. When I was working with Dana and I was watching Dana develop his ideas as a director, I could communicate to him as a cinematographer, and we had a very close relationship as a result. And that is really magical and obviously, like you say, not that common, especially when you're working with a director who maybe doesn't understand the challenges they're putting you under. So, and Dana very much understands that. So I really like that process very much, yeah. That's a great question. I think that is the fundamental, the most important thing as a cinematographer is determining your relationship with the director on a given project and how much of your ideas to present, how much of your ideas to suppress. For me, it's figuring out when to assert myself and when to sit back and allow the process to happen naturally, because I am someone that oftentimes is very opinionated, but I try very much to listen first and be a cog in the director's machine. I think when you work with someone new, when I work with someone new, it's the first few days is spent learning how that director's machine operates and how best to fit in that person's workflow so that you can be a supportive partner. You know, some directors have very specific ideas and they have very specific shots in mind or style that they want to approach the film with or whatever, and others are very loose or don't have fully developed ideas, and so that process of learning how you can be a good partner to them is to me the fundamental. I think time is the cinematographer's enemy, but it can also be your most important tool. What television teaches you, at least what it taught me, is planning and thinking about how to maximize your day and be efficient and structure your practice so that you can get the maximum results. And so television was incredibly helpful to me. And you're right, feature films typically probably have more time, but oftentimes the set pieces are more elaborate. Yeah. The expectations are higher. The actors' schedules are more restrictive. So you may have more time in theory, but in practice, actually, it's been my experience, oftentimes I have less. Generally, the tools that we use as cinematographers are almost always in response to schedule. It's been my experience, even in this room, for example, we're using this light probably because we're not shooting it at the exact perfect time of day. And had we been able to control the perfect time of day when the sun is coming in this way, we wouldn't need it, All of us, at least myself, I think of it as, God, if I could just control when we shoot something, I would need nothing. So now I have to react to conditions that are out of my control. And that is kind of the great irony of cinematography in a way, is we are always reacting to something. At least I find I am. I think virtual production is a really exciting idea and can be very effective when it's used in a responsible way that is driven by the story. I don't think it's the answer to every problem, and I think it is something that requires tremendous discipline from everyone involved. It can be restrictive, it can be time-consuming. I think it's something that is not fully understood by a lot of people, and it's slowly, obviously, taking more shape. And there are enormous advantages. I love the fact that in a virtual stage, I can control time and stop it, so I can make it dusk for the entire day, and that is obviously tremendous benefit. But it's not the answer to every problem, and I still like to shoot on location if I can. I think it always looks better. It always looks better. Absolutely, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's, and I think it also, in a virtual stage, you leave with something nearly finished in the camera. So in the editing process, it doesn't rely on the editor having to imagine what the green screen is. They're looking at the performance in context of the background. And I think that makes an enormous difference to how the film is finished. Even if you ultimately replace the background, the director and the editor have reasonably finished footage that they can work with. When I work with someone new, I really just try and listen as much as possible and watch how they interact and learn about what's important to them. You go through the process of location scouting or even discussions about the script. I try to always start with questions. What are you reacting to? What's important here? What is it about? What do we want the audience to feel? And ultimately, I think the aesthetics of a film, they're born naturally, or they should be. And they have far more to do with locations, sets, costumes, the way that all the people come together and put it together. It should be a natural birth. And so the director's process has so much to do with the resulting aesthetic aspects of the film, and also the pace of the film and the structure of the film. And if the director is very frenetic and doesn't like to rehearse, for example, and wants to run in with the camera and shoot a kind of a very verite style film, that's obviously a completely acceptable way to make great movies. But it has enormous effects on the aesthetic of the movie, and not just the camera work, but also the type of lighting you can do and the type of filtration you can do, etc. So I try hard to watch the director's prep process and learn from them quietly about what they are reacting to and how they are structuring the scenes and how they're scouting locations and how they're processing. And then I find, if I'm very patient, the result is almost born without any discussion at all. And it's my opinion that cinema is that the director is the author and should be. And so we are all very much there to support what it is they're making, even if they don't know what it is they're making. On Gone Girl, where I was the gaffer, I had watched David work with Jeff Cronenweth, and I had seen his process of blocking and staging and camera direction, and how he and Jeff worked together, and how they worked with the operator, and how they developed the film. And I was really blown away by how meticulous his process was. But also, David is very collaborative, but he's also very sure about what he likes and what he doesn't like, which to me is the ultimate dream. You want someone who is confident about what it is they are trying to accomplish. And then they go to their collaborators and they look to them for assistance in accomplishing it. When we did Mindhunter, I took a lot of that with me, and it allowed me to really quite quickly develop a process with David of really how we would determine what we were going to do. And then that was really easy, and actually the storytelling technique in Mindhunter was quite similar to the one in Gone Girl, I think, in terms of how we used the camera and how we were lighting things, and etc. They look very different, but it's sort of the overarching approach that we took was quite similar. And then when we went to Mank, obviously the film is very different, and I think both of us probably still thought naively that the same rules would apply, but of course they didn't, because the film was different, and I think it probably scared us a little bit at the beginning, and realizing, we can't go to the automatic solution that's worked the last 2 years, because this project doesn't ask that of us. And it forced us to, just by nature of how different the film was from previous things we'd done together, it forced us to change our process and also change our how we qualified what was good work and what was appropriate. It changed the conversation, changed the grammar, changed the language of how we articulated something, whether something was working or not. And that, to me, is the most interesting thing about cinema, is the fact that you can have a technique, but the technique is always informed by and influenced by the content that you're making, and the back and forth, and the fact that it's, you make the movie 3 times. You make the movie when you write it, and then you make the movie when you shoot it, and then, of course, the movie gets ultimately made in the editing process, and they're never the same. I love to be in the rehearsal, and I love to be in the rehearsal as early as possible. So, and David's very generous about that. He's happy to invite you in and watch. And I think it's dangerous to read a script by yourself and interpret it by yourself, especially a script as dense as Mank. Not only kind of historical significance and needs to be to some degree historically accurate, but also leaves room for interpretation in terms of subtext. And for me, I often find that when I read a script by myself, my interpretation of the subtext in the scene is very different from this actor or that actor or the director. I think that that actually is fairly consistent amongst all filmmakers. And it isn't until the rehearsal process, and it isn't until the actors interpret the scene with the director and where we really understand what the scene is about. I personally think that that is really the exciting thing that happens. Is not just watching one actor's interpretation of the scene, but watching the scene take shape in the process of rehearsal, and then the resulting discussion around whether or not that is the correct direction to take the scene in. You know, sometimes as a cinematographer, you're a quiet observer, but other times the process by how you shoot it can have an enormous effect on the interpretation of the subtext of the scene, or the interpretation of the dominant part of the scene as well, you know. So sometimes I was very vocal about what I thought in the rehearsal, or sometimes it was just a quiet conversation between David and I of something I had seen, or, you know, and it could be a simple thing like an actor is reacting to something off camera that's not dialogue driven, but you know, and there are cases in particularly in Mindhunter actually where that ends up being the kind of pivotal turning point of the scene editorially, and you know, it's just because we happen to see the actor do something that was not predicted. So I think it's the rehearsal and the interpretation of the scene that develops the ideas ultimately. Historically, for me, it's always been the decisions on the set tend to be very reflexive, and I believe very much that if you do your work in the prep with the director, and it doesn't mean you have to say this camera is going to be here on a 35mm lens in 6 months. If you understand enough about the story, it doesn't even have to be narrative driven. If you just understand conceptually what it is you're trying to do, then the resulting decisions that you make minute by minute on the set should flow naturally, like playing music, because there's always a bit of jazz happening. I think, you know, you thought that actor was going to go there, and now they're there, and they're further from the window, so you have to make adjustments. And I think if you're very comfortable with what the movie is meant to be, then those decisions are easy. In the case of Mank, I think there were more questions in our heads about whether or not it was the right thing, and a lot of that was driven because black and white is such a statement in the way that color is not, I think. And so I was probably hypersensitive to the decisions we were making and whether or not they were too gestured, or they were too elaborate, or they were not elaborate enough, or we hadn't gone far enough, or we needed to be more bold or less bold, or it should be noir, or it should be glamour, and you very quickly go down the rabbit hole of, and in the end, I think you have to kind of just trust your instinct and say, okay, this feels right, and you know, and then go home and not sleep for 4 months because you're convinced you did the wrong thing. But you know, and I think, you know, within coming out of that experience into color again, I definitely felt more confident with my decision making, because I was, you know, in the case of Fargo, you know, especially that environment was very positive. But just trusting your gut in a way, you know, and also watching what everyone else was doing and sort of understanding what the show was about, and et cetera. Yeah, I mean, Legion was so exciting because you know, Dana called me and he said, hey, do you want to come do the show? And I actually didn't know what it was. And then I watched it and I said, wow, they're really doing wild stuff. And then I met, and the environment there was so different from anything I had experienced before, because the expectation was like, just be creative. Just think outside the box, do something interesting, and push yourself to do something you would never do before. And it was a very supportive place. Try any lenses you want. Just don't do the easy thing. That was so cool, because everyone there was just very freely expressing themselves and trying things and exploring. I came later. I just shot a couple. You know, it was really Dana and Paulie. It's really their show. You know, I think Dana in particular had, you know, he had done the first season and he had developed, you know, I think Dana's incredible, and he just is, you know, just always willing to try something. I'm probably, you know, far more conservative in my thinking. And then when I joined the show and was given the opportunity to play, you know, they could not have been more supportive and encouraging of just, oh no, you want to shoot CinemaScope and then go to full frame, and then you can shoot anamorphic here and spherical here. And it was a playground, you know, and it felt like we could, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And that was okay. I really appreciate that, because there were no rules to break. It was just have fun. And obviously support what's happening dramatically, you know, but not in the easy way. I go back and forth on that. I struggle with that, actually. I think that Cassavetes or you know, or David Fincher or you know, or Stanley Kubrick or whatever, you know, it's dangerous to make comparisons. But you know, they both equally have their place in cinema. I love Murder of the Chinese Bookie as much as I love 2001, but they have completely different approaches and completely different results. I think it's really dangerous as a cinematographer to make judgments around what is better. The most important thing you can do as a cinematographer, I think, is to be generous and recognize that sometimes if it tells the story, but the actor was out of frame momentarily, but it tells the story better than if they were in the frame and on the mark, maybe that's okay. You know, if the director says, no, I need that exact performance again, this time on the mark. But for the cinematographer to impose those expectations on the process individually, I think is generally not appropriate. And you sort of have to be as flexible as you can, create the best environment for the process to happen. When you have trained actors that understand how the camera direction is being done, and they know focal lengths, and they know blocking, and they understand screen direction, and that takes an enormous weight off the cinematographer's shoulders. Well, you know, I think it was easier when, in a way, when the cameras weighed 50 kilos and the lights were, you had to ignite something on fire and you had to move it around, and if the person leaned a little bit like this, they were black. And in some regards, the ease by which we make images now has changed the process more than anything else, I think. We asked for a lot of discipline from the actors and the operator, and you know, we put down marks, we rehearsed the shot, we made sure that, you know, and we thought a lot about the cutting sequence and the process, and you know, there are moments in the movie where the lighting is quite dramatic, but they, you know, the actors understood that about the process, and we had talked to them about it, and so that was not a surprise to anybody. You know, the gaffer that I've been working with, at least in the United States, I've been working with him for 15 years. He knows me very well. The thing that I look for the most is, in any collaborator, really, but in particular the gaffer, and maybe the operator, is vulnerability on both sides. His name's Danny, and Danny is not afraid to say, Eric, this looks like shit. We gotta fix this. And sometimes that's the most comforting thing to hear, because deep down you know it, but you're looking at the time, you're looking at the schedule, you're looking at the actors there, and you need a partner to remind you, no, okay, hold on, we need a second, we're gonna fix this, or whatever, or you've gone a direction and the crew is 100% behind you, and it hasn't been a good decision. When I'm honest with myself and honest with the crew around, okay, we tried this didn't work, what do we do now? Having people around you that recognize that you tried something, Now we need to do something else. And that to me is collaboration.